I drove my best friend's mom home that night, and she asked me to take one more loop around the block before we stopped. Her voice cracked on the word, please. That crack is the reason I still think about that street corner every single day. Something happened in that car nobody in my life knows about. Not my best friend, not my own mother, nobody. Stay with me, because by the end you'll understand why one quiet street became the loudest memory I own. Tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? Her name was Diane, Marcus's mother. Marcus had been my best friend since 4th grade, back when we still traded snacks at lunch instead of secrets. Diane had been in my life for 15 years. The woman who kept extra plates ready for dinner because she assumed I'd show up hungry. The one who drove us to baseball practice when my own parents worked late. Not just Marcus's mom. Furniture in my life. Steady, familiar. The kind of presence you stop really looking at because you've seen it every day since you were 9 years old. Marcus's engagement party filled Diane's backyard that evening. String lights strung between 2 oak trees, a borrowed speaker playing songs from a decade ago, the smell of citronella candles and grilled corn hanging in the warm air. Diane laughed louder than anyone, refilling glasses, making sure every guest had somewhere to sit. She was the center of that party even though it wasn't her night. By 11, most people had left. Marcus and his fiancée had gone to drop off her parents. Staying behind to stack chairs felt natural. That's what you do when a house has fed you 100 times over the years. Diane waved off the last of her helpers and turned to me with keys dangling from 2 fingers. My car's making a sound I don't trust, she said. Could you drive me the 4 blocks home? I'll walk back for it tomorrow. 4 blocks. Saying yes to Diane had always been a reflex built over a decade and a half. This time was no different. The party noise faded fast once we pulled away from the curb. Empty streets, streetlights throwing long yellow circles on the pavement. Diane rolled her window down halfway. The same perfume she'd worn since I was a teenager drifted across the car. Something warm, like vanilla left too long in the sun. You did good tonight, she said, helping clean up like that. It's nothing, I said. You fed me more meals than my own kitchen has. Laughter came back smaller than her usual laugh. Quieter. A glance sideways, and the streetlight caught her face at an angle I'd never really studied before. Tired around the eyes, a little sad around the mouth, in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion from party planning. Turn left up here, she said. Not right. Left was the long way. I turned left anyway because you don't argue with Diane about directions in her own neighborhood. Past the elementary school where Marcus and I used to wait for the bus together. Past the church with the crooked steeple that had needed repainting since I was 12. Nothing about the drive should have felt different from 100 other rides in that town. But something in the air had shifted, and I couldn't name it yet. Marcus is getting married, Diane said, not quite to me. More to the windshield. In 6 months, I'll be a mother-in-law. You'll be great at it, I said. I don't feel like I'm great at anything lately. Her voice had gone thin. The kind of thin that comes right before someone says something they've been holding for a long time. Nothing came to mind as a response, so I said nothing. The silence sat between us like a third passenger. Her street arrived sooner than I expected. The porch light was on, warm and yellow, waiting the way it always did. Slowing the car, ready to pull into her driveway the way I had 100 times before. Returning a casserole dish, walking Marcus home after we'd stayed up too late in her basement. A hand landed lightly on the dashboard, not touching me, just marking a boundary in the air. Wait, she said. Don't turn in yet. I eased off the brake. Everything okay? For a moment, she studied her own porch light like it belonged to someone else's life. Can we take one more loop? She asked. Please. That word, please, didn't sound like a woman asking for a small favor. It sounded like someone asking to postpone something she wasn't ready to face. Whatever that something was, I wasn't going to say no. Back onto the main road instead of her driveway. Diane didn't explain herself, and I didn't push her to. We drove past the gas station that had closed 2 summers ago, its sign dark and half-torn from a storm nobody had bothered fixing. We drove past the field where Marcus and I used to catch fireflies, back when a whole summer night felt endless and safe. You know, Diane said, you're the only person who's asked me how I'm doing tonight. At my own son's engagement party. How are you doing? I asked, because someone had to actually ask it and mean it. A block and a half passed before any answer came, long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer at all. Lonely, she said finally, in a house that's about to get quieter. The shape of that feeling was familiar even if I hadn't lived her version of it. Marcus moving out for college had already emptied half that house years ago. Marriage would take the rest of what was left of him living under her roof, even if only symbolically. My own mother came to mind, and the day I'd eventually move out for good, and the silence that would follow. "You still have people who show up," I said. "I showed up tonight. I'll keep showing up." Slowly, she turned her head toward me, like she was deciding whether to believe something. Streetlight, shadow, streetlight, shadow. Her face moving through light the way film moves through a projector. "Why do you think I asked you to drive me instead of calling a cab?" she asked. The question sat there, heavier than it should have for 4 simple words. My hands tightened slightly on the wheel, not from fear, but from the sudden awareness that this drive had never really been about a broken-down car. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Why?" "Because you're the only one who still looks at me like I'm a person," she said. "Not somebody's mother, not somebody's hostess, a person." No answer came right away. Something had gone tight in my chest, some mixture of flattery and fear, and something else I wasn't ready to name. The radio was off, so the only sound was tires against asphalt and her breathing, slower than mine. A buzz from the cuff holder. Marcus's name lit up the screen. "Marcus, hey, is Mom with you?" She's not answering her phone. Staring at the screen a second too long. Diane glanced at it too, and something crossed her face. Not guilt exactly, but the look of someone caught in a moment she wasn't ready to explain. "Don't answer that yet," she said quietly. "Please, just 5 more minutes." Without replying, I set the phone face down on the console and told myself it was only because I didn't want to type and drive. That was a lie I was telling myself, and some part of me already knew it. The old drive-in theater drifted past the window, closed for years, its screen a giant blank rectangle against the dark sky like a mouth that had stopped talking. "Do you remember when you and Marcus snuck in here through the fence?" Diane asked. "You were 15. I found the flashlight you left in your jacket pocket when I did laundry." "You never told him you knew," I said. "There's a lot I never tell him," she said. "Not Marcus, just him." That single word made the sentence feel bigger than the memory attached to it. The conversation seemed to shift under us like the road itself had tilted slightly, and I gripped the wheel a little tighter, unsure whether to slow down or speed up. "Diane," I said carefully, "is there something you want to tell me?" Her hands folded in her lap like she was holding something invisible and fragile. "There's a version of tonight," she said slowly, "where I say something I can't take back. And there's a version where I stay quiet and go inside and let my porch light turn off behind me like nothing happened." My pulse picked up, not from excitement exactly, but from the electric uncertainty of standing at the edge of a conversation that could change everything that came after it. "Which version is this?" I asked. Out the window her gaze went, instead of answering, and for a long stretch of road, neither of us said a single word. If you've ever sat in a car with someone and felt the whole conversation tilt sideways without either of you saying the thing that's actually happening, you already know exactly what that silence felt like. Past the water tower, on the edge of town. The one with faded graffiti from some graduating class decades before mine. Diane finally spoke again, her voice lower than before, like she was talking more to herself than to me. "I married young," she said. "Younger than I should have. Marcus came before I ever figured out who I was without somebody needing something from me." "You did a good job with him," I said. "He's one of the best people I know." "He is," she agreed. "But being somebody's mother for 22 years doesn't leave a lot of room to be anything else." Then his father left, and I became somebody's ex-wife on top of it. Now he's marrying someone, and in 6 months I'll be somebody's mother-in-law too. Every label I've ever worn belongs to somebody else's story. There was something recognizable in that, even if I hadn't lived her version of it. My own mother came to mind again, disappearing into roles the same way, wife then mother then caretaker, until you almost forget there was ever a person underneath those titles who had wanted things just for herself. "What do you want?" I asked. "Just for you, not attached to anybody else's name." Laughter came back from her, but it wasn't a happy sound, the laugh of someone surprised by a question nobody had asked her in years. Nobody's asked me that since I was 23, she said. My old middle school drifted past the window, dark and locked for the night, the flagpole rope clanging softly against metal in the breeze. At a stop sign we didn't need to linger at. I stopped anyway, because something in me wanted to buy this moment a few extra seconds. I want to feel like somebody sees me, Diane said finally. Not the version of me that hosts parties and remembers everyone's allergies and keeps the porch light on. The actual me. The one who used to want to travel before she had a baby at 23. The one who used to sing before she convinced herself she wasn't good enough to keep doing it. I see that version, I said, and meant it more than I expected when the words left my mouth. Headlights from a passing car lit the inside of ours like a flashbulb catching a photograph neither of us had asked to be in. She was looking at me fully now. Be careful saying things like that to me tonight, she said quietly. I might actually believe you. A second buzz from the console. Marcus again. Marcus, seriously, where's Mom? Her phone's going straight to voicemail now. The screen glowed between us like evidence. The weight of it was heavier than the wheel in my hands. Diane reached over, not fast, not dramatic, just slow and deliberate, and turned the phone face down again. Please, she said. Not yet. This is the part of the drive I still replay more than any other. Not because of what was said, but because of what almost was. The overlook above the reservoir arrived without me consciously choosing it. The same spot Marcus and I used to hike up to as teenagers with a couple of warm sodas and nothing better to do with a Saturday. My hands had just taken us there, the way muscle memory takes you home, even when your mind is somewhere else entirely. Broken silver pieces of moonlight scattered across the water below. Diane unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't get out. She just sat there, looking at the same view I used to look at as a kid who thought his whole life was still ahead of him. Uncomplicated. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? She asked. Always, I said. The night of my wedding, I stood in the bathroom of the reception hall and cried, she said. Not happy tears. I cried, because I already knew deep down that I was choosing a smaller life than the one I'd imagined for myself. And I told myself that was selfish to feel on my own wedding day, so I splashed water on my face and went back out and danced like everything was fine. That's not selfish, I said. That's honest. 20+ years of being honest with everyone except myself, she said, eyes wet when she turned toward me in her seat, though she wasn't crying. Not exactly. Just close to it, the way water gets close to the edge of a full glass without spilling over. Diane, I know how this sounds, she said quickly before I could finish. I know exactly how this sounds. You're my son's best friend. You've eaten dinner at my table more times than I can count. This is not something I should be saying to you. But you're saying it, I said quietly. Because for the first time in a long time, tonight in this car I felt like a person instead of a role, she said. And I didn't want that feeling to end the second we pulled into my driveway. What followed wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was full the way a held breath is full right before you finally let it out. Looking at her, really looking, the way she'd said nobody looked at her anymore. I understood with a clarity that scared me a little, that this was a moment that could tilt in more than one direction. Whichever direction it tilted would be the one we'd both have to live with. I care about you, I said carefully. I always have. But I care about Marcus too. And I don't think either of us wants to be the reason something breaks that can't be fixed. Her eyes closed for a second like she was steadying herself against something. You're right, she said. You're right. And I hate that you're right. And I'm grateful you're right all at the same time. A hand reached toward the dashboard, not toward me, but toward the dashboard, and pressed flat against it, the same gesture from earlier when she'd asked me not to turn into her driveway yet. This time it felt like a different kind of boundary. Not yet. This time it felt like, not ever, spoken without words, and somehow that felt braver than anything she could have said out loud. Take me home, she said softly. For real this time. The engine came back to life, and we drove down from the overlook in a silence that felt different from every silence before it. Lighter somehow, like something unspoken had been spoken and could stop pressing so hard against both our chests. Neither of us said much on the way back into town. Diane rolled her window all the way down, letting night air move to the car, through her hair, across both our faces. Whatever had almost happened between us had folded itself back up and tucked itself away. Not gone, but put somewhere safer for both our sakes. Her street came into view. The porch light still on, still waiting, the way it always had been. But a second car sat in her driveway that hadn't been there before. Marcus's car. Standing on the porch steps when we pulled in, phone in hand, his fiancée's car idling at the curb behind him. His face, lit by the porch light, ran through three expressions fast: worry, relief, and then something sharper when he saw who was driving his mother home at midnight. "Where have you two been?" he asked, stepping down toward the car as I put it in park. "I called like 6 times. "My phone died," Diane said smoothly, climbing out before I'd even fully stopped the engine. "He was just giving me a ride since my car was making that noise. We got to talking and lost track of time." Not exactly a lie. Not exactly the truth either. Staying in the driver's seat a moment longer than necessary, I watched Marcus study his mother's face the way sons do when something feels slightly off, but they can't name what. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, softer now. "Better than okay, actually," Diane said, and for the first time all night, I believed she meant it. Not as a performance for someone else's comfort, but as something true. Past her shoulder, his eyes found mine, still behind the wheel. "Thanks for getting her home safe, man." No suspicion in his voice. Just the easy trust of 15 years of friendship, and something about that trust sat heavy in my chest, grateful and guilty in equal measure. "Any time," I said, and meant that too, in ways I wasn't ready to fully examine yet. Halfway up her porch steps, she stopped. Turned back toward the car. Just for a second. Just long enough for our eyes to meet one more time across the driveway, headlights and 15 years of history now carrying one new, unspoken chapter. "Thank you for the loop," she said, quiet enough that only I would understand what she really meant by it. Through the front door she went, the porch light clicking off behind her exactly the way she'd once said it would. Except this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a door left open just slightly, in case either of us ever needed it again. 2 knocks on my car's roof, his signature, unchanged since we were kids. "Drive safe," he said, and jogged back toward his fiancée's waiting car. A full minute passed with the engine idling, hands still on the wheel, staring at a porch light that had already gone dark. Everything Diane had said kept cycling through. About being seen. About the life she'd almost lived. About the version of tonight where she said something she couldn't take back. We'd landed, somehow, in the version where she stayed quiet. But quiet isn't the same as nothing. Quiet, I was learning, can hold an entire conversation inside it. One that never needs to be spoken out loud to be real. Nearly 3 weeks passed before Diane and I were in the same room again. Not because either of us was avoiding the other, at least, that's what I told myself, but because ordinary life simply didn't put us in the same place. Marcus was consumed with wedding planning. Extra shifts at work filled my weeks. The overlook above the reservoir stayed exactly where it had always been, holding a conversation neither of us had finished. A Tuesday night phone call from Marcus, his voice carrying the particular stress of someone caught between 2 people he loved. "Can you do me a favor?" he asked. Mom's caterer for the engagement dinner backed out last minute. She's stressed about it and won't ask for help because she doesn't want to seem like she can't handle things. Could you swing by and help her sort out a backup plan? She trusts your judgment more than mine on this stuff. Yes came out before I'd fully thought through what saying yes actually meant. A paint-stained sweatshirt, hair pulled back loosely. Diane answered the door, looking less like the polished hostess from the engagement party and more like the person she'd described in the car that night. The one underneath all the roles. "He sent you, didn't he?" she said. Not quite a question. "He did," I admitted. "But I would have come anyway if you'd asked." Surprise crossed her expression, that I'd said it out loud instead of leaving it as an unspoken thing the way we'd left everything else. 2 hours at her kitchen table, calling caterers, comparing menus, the ordinary logistics of an engagement dinner slowly getting sorted between us. Mundane work, but it felt like something rebuilding itself in a new shape, not the easy, unconscious familiarity of 15 years, and not the charged uncertainty of that night in the car either. Something in between. Something more honest than either version had been. "I've been thinking about what I said," Diane admitted eventually, staring at a caterer's brochure without reading it. "In the car. I want you to know I don't regret saying it, even if nothing ever comes of it." I needed to say it to someone, and I'm glad it was someone who actually listened instead of making it about themselves. I'm glad you trusted me with it, I said. Very few people get the parts of myself I usually keep hidden, she said. You're one of them. That hasn't changed, whatever else has or hasn't. Marcus came to mind. The wedding 6 months out. 15 years of trust built, one dinner, one ride home, one small kindness at a time. What it would mean to protect that trust, even in the moments it would have been easier not to. Some doors are worth leaving closed, I said slowly. Not because what's behind them isn't real, but because what's on this side of them, the friendship, the family, all of it matters more than what might be waiting on the other side. A long pause followed, then a slow, certain nod, like she'd already arrived at the same conclusion on her own, and had just been waiting to hear someone else say it first. You're a good man, she said. Marcus is lucky to have you. And so, in a smaller way, am I. The caterer situation got sorted that evening. Leaving her house a little after 10, I looked back at her porch from the driveway, and the light didn't feel like an ending or a door left open. Just a porch light, warm and steady, belonging to a woman who was beginning to see herself as more than the roles she'd worn for 20 years. 6 months later, exactly as scheduled, in a backyard not far from the one where the engagement party had been held. Different string lights, same oak trees. Marcus stood at the altar in a suit that fit him better than any piece of clothing I'd ever seen him wear. And when his fiancée walked down the aisle, his face rearranged itself into something I can only describe as complete. 2 rows back, close enough to see Diane in the front row, pale blue dress, tissue already in hand, prepared for exactly this moment. When the ceremony ended and the applause started, she turned around briefly, scanning the crowd, and found me. Not the hostess smile I'd known for 15 years. Something quieter, more private, meant only for the two of us. Near the drink table at the reception, away from the noise of the DJ setting up, Diane pulled me aside for a moment. I signed up for a singing class, she told me, like she was confessing something enormous. Community center Tuesday nights. I haven't sung in front of anyone since I was 23. How was it? I asked. Terrifying, she said, laughing for real this time. The big, unguarded laugh I remembered from before that night in the car, but with something new underneath it. And the best thing I've done for myself in years. I'm proud of you, I said, and watched the words land somewhere real in her, the way certain sentences do when spoken by someone who means them. You gave me that, she said. That night in the car, you didn't have to ask how I was doing. You didn't have to listen the way you did. You didn't have to say no to something that would have been easy to say yes to. All of that told me I was worth being seen as more than somebody's mother. 30 years to hear that. I heard it from you. My name across the yard, Marcus, waving me over for a photo. Diane squeezed my arm once, quick and warm, before letting me go toward the noise and light of the party. One last glance back before crossing the lawn. A woman standing a little straighter than she had 6 months earlier, who had chosen to keep a door closed for the sake of everything on this side of it, and who had found, somehow, that closing that door hadn't cost her anything at all. It had given her room to open different ones instead. Sometimes people ask, when I tell pieces of this story, why nothing more happened that night. Why the car ride ended the way it did instead of the way stories like this usually end in the versions people expect. The honest answer is that I've thought about that overlook above the reservoir more times than I can count. Turning the moment over the way you turn a stone in your pocket, checking every side of it. Here's what became clear. Some moments aren't tests of what you want. They're tests of what you're willing to protect. That night, in some quiet, complicated corner of myself, I wanted to know what would have happened if I'd said yes to whatever Diane was almost offering. But wanting something and choosing something are two entirely different roads, and I've never once regretted the road I chose. Something unexpected came from that drive. A lesson neither of us fully understood until much later. Loneliness doesn't always look like being alone. Sometimes it looks like a woman surrounded by people at her own son's engagement party, refilling everyone's drink, remembering everyone's allergies, and going unseen by every single person in that backyard except the one who happened to ask a simple question at the right moment. How close we all walk, every day, to versions of our lives that never happen. The version where I said yes to a longer loop than the one we actually took. The version where Diane never asked the question at all and drove home in silence, carrying that loneliness back into an empty house with the porch light clicking off behind her. Neither of those versions happened. We lived the one where honesty got spoken out loud and then got gently, carefully, respectfully set back down. About that night, Marcus knows nothing, and he never will. Not because there's shame in it, but because there was nothing to be ashamed of. Two people, both a little lonely in their own ways, told each other the truth in a moving car under yellow streetlights, and then both chose, deliberately, to protect something bigger than the moment itself. Diane still sings on Tuesday nights. Marcus and his wife are expecting their first child now, which will make her a grandmother. One more role stacked on top of all the others she's worn over the years. But this time she'll wear it differently. Because underneath grandmother and mother and mother and mother-in-law and hostess, there's a woman who remembered she was allowed to exist as herself first. Every time I drive past that overlook above the reservoir, my foot eases off the gas, just slightly. The way you slow down passing a place that once held something important, even if nobody else driving by would ever know it was there. There's one more thing I never told anyone about that night, and I'm only telling you now. Days after the wedding, a small package turned up in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a cassette tape, an actual cassette, the kind nobody uses anymore, with a handwritten label that just said, "For the drive." Nothing that plays cassettes sat in my house. A used tape deck fixed that problem 2 days later. Her voice, recorded in what sounded like her kitchen. Humming at first, then singing, soft, unpolished, achingly real, a song I didn't recognize, one she must have written herself. At the very end of the tape, after the last note faded out, came a pause, and then her voice again, quiet, almost like she wasn't sure the recorder was still running. "Thank you for the loop," she said, echoing the exact words from that night in the driveway. "I hope, somewhere down the road, you'll take one of your own. Not because something's wrong, but because sometimes the extra loop is where you finally hear yourself think." That tape still lives in the glove box of my car. Every once in a long while, on a long empty road at night, it goes in, and I drive an extra loop before heading home. Not for her anymore, but for whatever version of that lesson I still need to relearn every so often. Years later, the truth of that night has settled into something clear. Not a near-miss romance. Not a secret, almost betrayal of my best friend. A single honest conversation between two people who happened, for one specific evening, to need exactly the same thing, to be seen as more than the role the world had assigned them. At the time, I was Marcus's best friend, a fixture, a familiar face, someone defined entirely by his relationship to someone else. Diane was Marcus's mother, a role so consuming it had quietly swallowed every other identity she'd once had. For one loop around a few empty streets, neither of us had to be defined by somebody else's name. Just two people, talking honestly under yellow streetlights, in a car that smelled faintly of vanilla and late summer. The version of that night where I'd said yes at the Overlook doesn't leave me alone entirely. How it would have unraveled everything, not just the friendship with Marcus, but Diane's relationship with her own son. Her sense of herself as someone who had raised him with integrity. The wedding that hadn't yet happened. The grandchild not yet imagined. One different choice in one parked car would have cost both of us. Something neither could have ever gotten back. What we got was rarer. The truth, spoken honestly, and then respected enough to be set carefully aside rather than acted on. A friendship with Marcus that stayed intact, unpoisoned by a secret neither of us ever had to carry the weight of hiding. And each of us, separately, a small but permanent reminder that being truly seen by another person doesn't require anything more than someone caring enough to ask a real question at the right moment, and caring enough to protect what matters most once the answer comes. Diane's porch light still clicks on every evening at dusk, the same as it always has. But underneath that light now I know what I never did before that drive. Not just a house, not just a mother waiting for her son to come home, but a whole person, beginning to be seen as exactly that. That cassette tape stays in the glove box. The extra loop happens sometimes, on quiet roads, when I need to hear myself think the way Diane once needed to. On some of those nights, I wonder what would have happened if I turned right into that driveway the first time she asked, instead of turning left. That answer will stay unknown, and honestly, peace has been made with not knowing. Have you ever had a moment where staying quiet said more than speaking ever could have? And if you were in that car that night, would you have taken the loop or gone straight home? If this story stayed with you the way that night stayed with me, hit subscribe, because there's another story like this one waiting for you next.